How many of you are familiar with care at the end of life? For those of you who aren't, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is the care that one receives at the end of their life. Generally, we think of physical care or medical care, but it also would include for that patient or person and their family things like mental health care, emotional care, and where I come in, spiritual care. I've really been involved in this work for over 20 years. I've had the privilege of spending time at the bedside and sharing sacred space when people actually die. I've also walked and journeyed with family members and other loved ones through those immediate and long seasons of grief. For me, this work is rooted very professionally in my calling as a minister into pastoral care, but also personally in all of the lives that I have lost, not just of those who I love, but those who have loved me, and what sometimes feels like a lifetime of grief and bereavement. But I've learned death takes a lot, but it doesn't take everything. And I do this work particularly to help people recover and not lose to death the things that death should not take and that death does not have the authority to take. I first met death in the spring of 1985. My friend Paul was diagnosed with a brain tumor. There are only really two memories I have of Paul. One, that lasting memory of when I saw him for the last time, sitting in his hospital bed with this bandage wrapped around his head from brain surgery. Paul was my friend from Sunday school, from evening service, from Wednesday night Bible study, and any other thing the church was doing. We were only 4 years old. That's a pretty early age to meet death eye to eye. But again, I said there are only really two memories I have of Paul, that lasting image of him in the hospital, and two, that he was my friend. I wrote to his parents last year and said, I'm not sure if you remember who I am, but Paul was my friend in Sunday school. And as I get ready to turn 40, I want you to know that your little boy still blesses my life. He still has an impact and an influence on me. I thought about him at all my major milestones, high school graduation, college, when I got married, when I had kids, and now that I'm headed toward 40. He still is my friend. Now, the first time I experienced death, and I experienced its full fury, its rage, and its sting, was in the summer of 1998. I had just graduated from high school, and my grandfather had come home from the hospital after open heart surgery. But he didn't come home to recover. He came home to die. And I learned two very important lessons that summer that really ground my work in end-of-life care. One, time to die is a real gift. And two, good grief can make all the difference. You see, time, all time, each and every moment we get is filled with boundless treasure. It's just the routine of life sometimes dulls our senses to how significant each moment is. That summer when we celebrated my grandfather's birthday, turns out it was just 3 days before he died. When we sang happy birthday, it wasn't any better or different than birthdays before. When we read the cards to him that we had meticulously picked out, it wasn't more special. It was just time to die helped us recover and discern just how sacred those moments are. Any birthday we get, not the last one, not the next one, this one we get in this moment. Now, as beautiful and sacred as many of those moments were, some of them were horrendous and gut-wrenching. But that's what good grief is. It's all of it. I particularly remember experiencing good grief at his empty recliner. You see, the body remembers a lot of things. And when I would walk into the living room from the kitchen and come up behind his recliner, my body remembered that not only is that where he sits, that's where he's sitting. And so there was a part of my body that would get excited in this sort of warm glow of love to be coming around the corner to see him. But then there was this cold reality in my mind that remembered standing on the other side of the living room when the funeral director wheeled his body out of the house. And very much like you would experience here in an Ohio summer thunderstorm, this warm air met with this cold air, and there at his empty recliner was this thunderstorm of grief and bereavement. But the longer I stood there, when I let that good grief pass, I remembered that this is the place where he sat. And somehow it was like he was still sitting there. And his love could comfort me, ironically, in his loss. Now, when I worked as a hospice chaplain, it was rare to serve Black families. There's a lot of reasons for that. Anecdotally, for me, I find some wisdom in Alice Walker's Color Purple. The character Miss Sophia. What did Miss Sophia do her whole life? She had to fight, right? And Miss Sophia's character typifies Black America. We fight high blood pressure, we fight diabetes, we fight cancer, we fight racism and oppression. And when we get to the end of life and death wants to take the rest that we've been fighting for, we fight it off. And so we don't welcome time to die, because time to die is really taking from us. And if you are Miss Sophia's granddaughter or her brother, life almost took Miss Sophia from you. You're not gonna let death do that. But I watched so many of my loved ones lose the opportunity to get the gift of time to die and good grief. And so I kept thinking, what form can we put this in? How can we give people a perspective? And then I thought, the living is not the only place we have in the community. We very much culturally and in my own religious tradition believe in the ancestors. But too often we believe in stuff we don't really practice. And so I would begin to invite my patients and family and people in the community, don't think of time to die as time to lose and leave. Think of it as a time to become an ancestor, where you get to transition not out of the community, but into a more sacred place where you still get to be involved and influence life. I'd like to tell you about two of mine. My grandmother's sister, Annie Lois May. My oldest daughter bears her name. She was, in some ways, my favorite relative. A year after she died, I was in her house. I was standing at her kitchen, peering out over the backyard, where I remember the day of her funeral, where I had crossed that backyard to the small church on the other side to spend just a little more time with her, to look at her face and take those few last fleeting moments that I knew we had. As I stood there, a ladybug crawled out on the curtain. Now, this ladybug didn't remind me of her. It didn't look like her. It was an insect. But as soon as I saw that red and black spotted insect, I knew it was her. As I thought about that last moment, I got to share space with her. Here she came to share space again. Now, as we would say in the church, like Mary, I pondered this in my heart. Because it was a little odd to say out loud to someone. A few months later, in a conversation with her son, my cousin Walter, he said, there were some strange things that happened when Mom died. Among them, the house filled full of ladybugs. That's kind of what I did in the moment. But it was a confirmation of this thing that I was sure of, but that was just a little bit kind of too odd to keep hold of. And from then on, ladybugs have always been a good or a bad omen in my life. Again, my oldest daughter bears my aunt's name. And one day coming through the maternity ward after my daughter was born, there was this little ladybug on the wall in the hallway. Her way of just coming to say, this is really beautiful. And then there was one morning I was going to breakfast and I opened the screen door, or opened the front door, and there on the screen door was a ladybug. And she was hard and cold. But it was as if my aunt was standing on the porch to say, "Hun, it's not going to be a good day, but I want you to know I'm here, and I can see you, and it's going to be okay." And before we could pay the bill for breakfast, I got a phone call that my first cousin had been shot, was not going to make it. And within a week, I was standing above her body, giving her eulogy. So there have been ways that she still gets to be present, influence, and just share space again. Earlier this year, now again, if that was a little out there for you, it's okay. Sometimes you got to pause with your audience and catch them up. But if it was, buckle your seatbelts because we're going to go a little farther out there. Earlier this year, I was spending some time with a friend of mine who is a seer. This is somebody who can see particularly spiritual things that most of us can't. And he says, this lady was by earlier today to drop off some things, and she had a guardian angel with her. I was like, huh? I said, well, like, how did you know? Like, could you see it? Like, did it have wings? Like, was it a light? Like, how did you know? And he paused. With that pause, you were like, oh, this. And he said, well, it's kind of like that man that sometimes comes with you. But his light bounces around. Now, this is not outside of my worldview, right? I believe in angels. I believe in spirits. But this was the first time I had had a real personal encounter with this. So I went home, and I did like most of us would do. I searched on the internet. How do you identify your spirit guide? And what was very comforting to me, the answer was familiar with me. Just put it out there. When I've got a big question for God, I just put it out there, and I leave it alone. But I put myself in a posture to look and listen for answers, maybe in places I don't expect. Within a week, I'm in another conversation, and somebody uses an expression to denote it had been a long time. It was not specifically this time frame. It's like if you say, like, I haven't seen you in a month of Sundays. I mean, you don't really mean that calculated like 31 days, right? Or it's once in a blue moon. And this person said, it's 36 years ago. And as soon as 36 years ago came out of his mouth, I was like, oh, that's a clue to that question I have out there. So on the way home, I get out my phone and I calculate 2021 minus 36. And if you're good at math, you know that's 1985. And I told you the first time I met death was in the spring of 1985 when my friend Paul died of a brain tumor. And what my friend had said to me, it's like that man who sometimes comes with you. And I said, that's the exact same phrase I would use to tell people about my friend. It's like he's always been with me. What does that mean? I don't know. Does it make me uncomfortable? Not really, but it might you. But I've come to a place to be able to share it with people and to add to the work to know that death takes a lot from us. And it probably has taken more from you than it should. And in this work, I want to encourage you and invite you to imagine, again, not just the people you have loved, but the people who have really loved you are still finding ways to share space and time with you, to whisper encouragement to you, to warn you of danger, to be a part of, as my own scriptures would say, that great cloud of witness, to give witness. Oh, no, you can do this. I was there when you went through worse. I remember when you did this. I remember when you overcame that. So again, if you're missing somebody today, or you come to your season where it's your time to be missed, influence doesn't end in this life. We really are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Thank you.